So here I'll go ahead with the French Revolution Part 2. In this chapter we are going to learn about post-revolution period. It was the reign of terror and rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. The French Republic was established in 1792 with the meeting of newly elected members of National Convention unanimously declaring France as a republic. But the newly formed government faced both internal and external problems. There were conflicts of interest among the members of National Convention. These were disagreements over the execution of King Louis XVI. The king's execution and the conflicts within the National Convention created a situation of turbulence and violence in France. Taking advantage of infighting in National Convention, the Jacobins, a radical political group, seized control of national conventions and initiated a series of radical measures. Led by their Maximilian Robespierre, the Jacobins unleashed the reign of terror from 1793 to 1794. It was a 10-month-long period in which people suspected as being enemies of the revolution were executed. The enemies included ex-nobles and clergy, members of other political parties, even members of his own party who did not agree with his methods. However, this was also the period when some of the more egalitarian principles of the revolutions were put to practice through the of food grains, the ending of all aristocratic privileges, and the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. Here we'll go ahead with the Thermidorian reaction. Thermidorian is a member of the French moderate group who participated in the downfall of Robespierre and his followers on the 9th Thermidor, that is July 27, 1794. So I'll go ahead. However, this authoritarian rule was short-lived and ended with the execution of Robespierre in 1794. Robespierre's death marked the beginning of the Thermidorian reaction, a moderate phase in which the French people revolted against the excess of the reign of terror. After the fall of the Jacobins government, the wealthier middle class seized power. They approved a new constitution which provided for 2 elected legislative councils. Executive power would lie in the hands of a 5-member directorate. However, there were frequent conflicts between the directorate and legislative councils. The political instability of the directorate paved the way for the rise of military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte emerged as a figure in the revolution period. He was a wonderful military leader. During the years of the revolution, Napoleon rose through the ranks of the military very rapidly and was made general due to his spectacular military tactics. He was being hailed as a hero by the French people who were tired of the directory's inefficient. On 9th November 1799, Napoleon orchestrated a coup and seized power in France. He abolished the directory and appointed himself France's first consul. The event marked the end of the French Revolution and the beginning of the Napoleonic era. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of France. He resolved internal conflicts and brought stability and security to France. He introduced economic, legal, and social reforms. though he was opposed to the idea of liberty. Napoleon proved to be a general of outstanding ability. Between 1801 and 1812, he managed to bring most of Europe under his rule. However, his reign was brief and he lost most of the conquered lands by 1815. And here the war with Britain. In 1805, Admiral Nelson, a commander in the British Royal Navy, defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar. In relations, Napoleon launched the Continental blockade in 1806 to stop commerce between Europe and Britain and thus ruin Britain's trade. Napoleon defeated the alliance of Austria and Russia at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1806. He then formed the Confederation of the Rhine. Initially made up of 16 German states, the Confederation was later joined by 19 others. Austria and Prussia, however, stayed out of the Confederation. Napoleon introduced the same system of administration here as in the rest of his empire, thereby unifying these scattered states for the first. The Confederation, which lasted up to 1813, helped in the unification of Germany later. This was the time of the Peninsular Wars. Napoleon attacked Spain and Portugal when they refused to support the continental blockade. This Peninsular War dragged on from 1807 to 1814 and drained Napoleon of both men and resources. Therefore, historians refer to this episode as Napoleon's Spanish also. Here you can see various pictures from the War of Russia, or you can say War with Russia on screen. In meantime, Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812 with a huge army. The Russians, however, devised a clever plan to trap Napoleon. As Napoleon's army advanced, the Russian troops retreated deeper into the interiors of Russia, burning their own villages and crops as they went. This denied the French army access to food. Napoleon finally reached Moscow, but was still unable to win a decisive victory over the Russians. By this time, the bitterly cold Russians' winter had set in. Napoleon ordered his army to retreat, but by this time most of his army perished, frozen and hungry. Just a fraction of the army returned safely to France. The Russian campaign was thus a disaster. Napoleon was forced to abdicate the throne and went into temporary exile. After 2 years, he came back to power briefly before being routed by the British in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. As England, Prussia, Russia, and Austria now formed a coalition, that's the union that defeated Napoleon and exiled him to the island of Elba. Before long, however, he escaped to France, where he ruled as emperor for 100 days. However, he suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Waterloo under the Duke of Wellington in June 1815. This time he was imprisoned and sent to faraway St. Helena, where he died in 1821. Here we go ahead with causes of Napoleon's downfall. Several forces operated against Napoleon. His military campaigns created discontent and ill will against him in several quarters. The battles fought by Napoleon cost France dearly in terms of money and people, as millions of soldiers lost their lives in the wars. His severe treatment of the Pope angered the Catholics everywhere. The dispossessed rulers were resentful, so were the new national forces that emerged at the fall of the monarchies, as they were ignored and excluded from the many political arrangements Napoleon made. Russia, suffering due to the blockade of England, refused to cooperate with Napoleon. This was a great blow from him. The failure of the Russian campaign severely damaged Napoleon's reputation. It also weakened his hold on Europe, as his army was reduced to a fraction of its original size. We are moving further. The impact of Napoleon's rule. Napoleon was inspired by Alexander the Great to build a unified European empire. Through his conquest, he brought scattered areas of Europe together under the First French Empire, as you can see on the map. This brought him close to his dream of creating the United States of Europe. Napoleon, however, did not limit his vision to conquest alone. He thus introduced a new legal code, the Code Napoleon, in 1804. The code, based on the principles of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, was introduced in all the countries that he conquered. This led to a unified administration and a bond of unity among all these countries. The code went on to become the basis for many modern European legal systems. And the time was of the end of feudalism and rise of nation states. Together, the French Revolution and Napoleon's rule brought an end to feudalism in France. Lands belonging to the church and the nobles were confiscated and privileges were abolished. All this also paved the way for capitalism, an economic system where the means of production are owned privately by individuals. Thus, Napoleon's rule brought about far-reaching changes in Europe. Thank you so much. We'll be back with another chapter.